Max, let Checo through, please.
I told you already last time, you guys don't ask that again to me. Okay? Are we clear about that?
Yeah. Thank you for that, guys. Thank you.
Now, as most of you are aware, Max Verstappen wrapped up the 2022 World Championship at the Japanese Grand Prix with 4 races to go. Red Bull would then go on to clinch the constructors title just 2 weeks later in the United States, for the first time in 9 years, and secure a double podium finish at Checo's home race. Everything was all sunshine and rainbows, until Brazil happened. It started during the sprint race, when Verstappen was struggling for pace on the mediums, and Perez asked if they could swap places to aid his bid to finish second in the Drivers' Championship. Red Bull ignored his request, and the two drivers came home in P4 and P5. Considering Leclerc was close behind Checo, it's understandable why the team chose to leave the cars as they were, given Max would have been exposed to Leclerc. What isn't understandable though is what happened the next day at the end of the Grand Prix. With Lando Norris retiring on lap 50 with a gearbox problem, the safety car was brought out, bringing Verstappen back into contention. But with Red Bull deciding against pitting Checo for softs, he was left vulnerable to the rest of the grid on the restarts. As expected, he tumbled down the order, and when Max came up behind him, the team ordered Sergio to allow the Dutchman through on the condition that he'd give the position back at the end if he couldn't overtake Alonso for 5th. And as we know, he refused, consequently destroying his relationship with the Mexican and his reputation as a sportsperson. Sergio didn't hold back in the post-race press conference, even stating that Max's 2 titles are thanks to him. Especially in the case of last season, Checo was one of the biggest reasons why Verstappen took the title. Of course, everybody remembers his incredible defensive driving to keep Hamilton at bay and reduce the gap between his teammate and the 7-time world champion by 8 seconds. Had he not done that, Lewis would have likely had enough of a buffer to Max to pit for fresh softs and not be left exposed. But Abu Dhabi was just one example of the countless times Checo sacrificed himself to help Verstappen in 2021. In both Brazil and Silverstone, he took the fastest lap away from Hamilton. In Monaco, he overcut Hamilton to take 6th place and further increased Verstappen's point swing in the championship. In Turkey, he once again fended off Lewis and kept him P5 as Max finished 2nd. I mean, I could go on, but you all get the idea. Even this season, Checo has shown nothing but trust and loyalty. For Verstappen to then backstab someone who has done so much for him is a true show of character. The lack of self-awareness required to not only deliberately screw over a teammate as great as Checo, but also double down on the decision over team radio is mind-boggling to me. Now, there were some rumours that Max's reason was to do with Monaco, as Perez apparently admitted to crashing on purpose to bring out the red flag, which I don't buy for a second. Firstly, had Checo confessed, he would have been either fired on the spot or severely reprimanded by the team. Secondly, Perez intentionally binning it only risks causing damage to his gearbox, which would have cost him a grid penalty on the hardest track to overtake on the calendar. And thirdly, Max wouldn't have been able to finish his lap anyway, given Alonso crashed a few seconds later at Mirabo. For those merely resorting to Checo's throttle and steering inputs as conclusive evidence to suggest he somehow planned it, is reaching to say the very least. In a desperate attempt to try and justify Verstappen's actions in Brazil, the Dutch media have only gone and done him a disservice. But let's assume that what they're reporting is true, that Max was still holding a grudge against Checo and wanted to get even Stevens with him. Has he not been telling people to quote, get over Abu Dhabi 2021 all season long, the championship defining race that was manipulated in his favour? Now all of a sudden, he can't supposedly get over something that holds barely any truth. Sounds pretty hypocritical to me. I mean, all it took was Ted Kravitz simply pointing out an objective fact, that had the rules not been broken and applied correctly, Lewis Hamilton would be an 8-time world champion. And just like that, he and Red Bull decide to boycott all Sky interviews throughout the Mexican Grand Prix weekend. But wait, didn't he say that after Abu Dhabi that he didn't care if people took the shine off his first title? I don't know about you, but that sounds like another contradiction. It's genuinely shocking just how many Red Bull fans jumped on this narrative despite there being little to no proof. When it came to the budget cap, they were adamant that the rumours should be taken with a pinch of salt. Now there's rumours about this, and just like that, they're sold. It doesn't make any sense. Nevertheless, people are still coming up with all kinds of counter-arguments to try and defend him. For example, as a world champion, you need to be ruthless no matter what the situation. Well, let's compare Verstappen to another world champion, who many consider him to be very similar to, Ayrton Senna. In 1991, with Mantle spinning out in the final race of the season, Senna had effectively secured the title, but decided to let his teammate Gerhard Berger through at the final corner to win his first race for McLaren. That's a true show of selflessness, even for a driver who had a so-called ruthless world champion's mentality. Another instance similar to this was Lewis letting his teammate back through in Hungary 2017, after a failed attempt at overtaking the Ferraris. Bottas in this case was even further behind than Perez was to Verstappen, yet Lewis stuck to his word and gave back the position. Mind you, Hamilton was in the middle of a championship fight and trailing Vettel in the standings at this point. Verstappen, on the other hand, was for some reason obsessed over finishing P6 despite having both the drivers' and constructors' titles already won. So, no matter what way you try and spin it, there's really no explanation other than Max was being selfish. Team leadership is about more than just being a good driver. It's also about maintaining a healthy working relationship with your teammates. Him holding a grudge against Checo for something that has no concrete evidence to prove its truth is petty and childish. The fact that he took offense to it isn't on anyone else, believe it or not, it's on him. Instead of constantly playing the victim, he actually needs to take accountability for his wrongdoings. In that very race where he betrayed Checo, he also admitted to crashing into Hamilton, stating, "I immediately felt he was not going to leave space. I just went for it, he didn't leave me space, so I knew we were going to get together." Wait, so if he knew they were going to collide, why not do the normal thing and back out of the move? I mean, it's not like that's what Lewis had to do time after time last year to avoid his races being ended. Besides, he was clearly ahead going into the apex of turn 2, but as per usual, Verstappen just chucked it into a non-existent gap and demanded that Lewis yields. And you know, it's almost as though the commentators and journalists are fearful of calling him out whenever he's driving recklessly. It's always a case of, "That's just Max being Max," or "He doesn't like to yield, does he?" Phrases that originated from within the Red Bull echo chamber. They will never deem him responsible for any incident he's involved in, and it's contributed to his stubbornness and refusal to change. The likes of Horner and Marco often use euphemisms like, "it's just hard racing," when in reality, it's dirty driving. In this case, the FIA did the right thing and held Verstappen accountable for the collision, but it's also important for people to hold him accountable for the manner in which he treated Checo. Regardless of whatever he thought about Monaco, there is still no conclusive evidence to prove it was intentional. As the saying goes, you see a person's true colours when you're no longer of any benefit to them. It appears to me that Max is taking Perez for granted, and it's going to come back to bite him. Slowly by slowly, Max is burning his reputation, and he doesn't seem to care. Some may find what I've said to be harsh, and that I'm being a hater. But honestly, Max has brought it upon himself. Not every negative comment about an individual automatically correlates to hate. Is he a talented driver? Of course he is. But does that mean he's exempt from valid criticism and backlash? Absolutely not. He's meant to be the poster boy for the sport, as the reigning world champion. What kind of example is he setting for young fans? To be egocentric and self-centered? Or what about being ungrateful and having a sense of entitlement? That's the brand that Max Verstappen is building for himself right now. And as if controversies like Abu Dhabi and the budget cap saga didn't taint his legacy enough, he's now seen by the world as an inconsiderate and poor team player. You want to know how great drivers become legends? It's not solely about the achievements. It's also about leadership and how you handle adversity. No driver is bigger than their team, but it certainly seems that Verstappen feels that way with Red Bull. How he redeems himself is yet to be seen at this point, but the key takeaway from all of this is that there's no I in team. It was the team efforts that brought Verstappen's recent success, not just him alone. People forget the mechanics who provide the most efficient pit stops on the grid. The strategy team that is renowned for their genius decision making. The greatest technical designer in the history of the sports, leading a team of engineers to develop 2 championship winning cars in back-to-back seasons during a major regulation overhaul. And of course, a noble right-hand man who displayed nothing but integrity throughout his title campaigns. Max Verstappen is exposing himself for all the wrong reasons, and it'll take some time before people regain respect for him. Let me know what you think of Verstappen's recent controversy in the comment section below. Be sure to like the video if you enjoyed, and subscribe to the channel with bell notifications to keep up to date with my latest content in the future. Share this around with others to see if they agree or disagree, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.